My name is Ilara Vance. For 10 years, it was Ilara Thorne. I want to tell you about the quiet love that built a world, and the quieter betrayal that shattered it. It begins, as these things often do, not with a bang, but with a breath held too long. I met Julian Thorne in a library, not a grand, marble-columned affair, but a dusty, sunlit university library where the air smelled of old paper and potential. He was a graduate student in finance, all sharp angles and focused intensity. I was an art history major, lost in a monograph on Baroque chiaroscuro. He asked me for help finding a text on market fluctuations. I found it. He asked me what I was reading. I told him about Caravaggio's use of darkness to make light feel sacred. He listened, truly listened, his brow furrowed not in boredom, but in genuine curiosity. "So," he'd said, a slow smile spreading, "you find meaning in the shadows?" That was Julian. He made you feel like your deepest, most obscure thoughts were the most important thing in the world. He was ambitious, yes. He came from a family of old, fraying Boston money, his mother, Eleanor, a widow who wore her diminished status like a hair shirt. But with me, he was soft. He was the man who brought me tea when I was painting, who remembered I hated the sound of metal scraping on porcelain, who whispered his dreams into my hair in the dark. A company of his own, a legacy built not from inheritance, but from grit and vision. I believed him. I believed in him. So when he asked me to put my own degree on hold, just for a year or two, my love, until the foundation is set, then you can have your own gallery, I promise. I did it without a second thought. I took a job as a paralegal to pay our rent while he finished his MBA. I learned to cook his mother's complicated, criticizable recipes to soothe her during her spells. I became the calm at the center of his storm, the warm, steady light in the home we made in a walk-up apartment with noisy pipes. When Thornfield Innovations was born in a rented garage, I was its midwife. I was the one who stayed up formatting business plans, who played hostess to skeptical investors, who soothed Julian's volcanic anxieties with my quiet certainty. Our love was our company's secret asset. It was in the shared, exhausted laugh at 3 a.m., in my hand on his shoulder as he stared at red numbers, in the unspoken vow that we were a single entity, a fortress. The success, when it came, was slow, then sudden. The patented algorithm for sustainable supply chain logistics was Julian's brainchild, he said, a stroke of genius. I cheered the loudest. We moved from the walk-up to a loft, then finally to the house in Chestnut Hill. It was Eleanor's choice, a stark, modern monument of glass and steel that felt more like a museum than a home. A statement, Julian said, kissing my forehead, a testament to how far we've come. I polished that statement. I learned the silent language of wealth, which charity galas to attend, which vineyards to name drop, how to arrange flowers that looked effortlessly expensive. I made the cold house feel, if not warm, then at least impeccably appropriate. Julian thrived. He grew into his success, his shoulders broadening with confidence, his smile becoming a tool. He was the golden boy CEO, the self-made man, and I was his wife, the quiet, supportive, tastefully dressed foundation. I thought our symphony was perfect. I didn't hear the first faint crack in the glass. The first flag was not red, but a pale, dismissive gray. It was at a dinner party. I was discussing a recent exhibit at the ICA with the wife of a potential investor. Julian leaned over, put a hand on my arm, and said, with a fond chuckle, "Don't get her started on art theory or we'll be here all night. My Ilara lives in the clouds." The table laughed. I smiled, a reflex, but something inside me chilled. He'd called my passion, the very soul he'd once found fascinating, the clouds, an amusing distraction from the serious business of reality. Then came the silence. Not angry silence, but a hollow, echoing kind. He'd come home later, his mind seemingly orbiting a different planet. "Long day," he'd murmur, scrolling through emails at dinner. big merger talks. You wouldn't understand the complexity. I tried to share something about my day, a course I was auditing online, a volunteer project at the museum, and he'd nod absently, his eyes on his phone. That's nice, darling. The distance was measured in inches that felt like miles. His criticisms, once rare and constructive, became subtle barbs. "Are you wearing that?" he'd ask, looking at my chosen outfit for an event. "Eleanor says the color washes you out." Or, "Maybe lay off the desserts, Alara. You know how you feel about your hips." He framed it as concern. I framed it as love. The real shift was his new assistant, Celeste, 24, whip-smart from Wharton, with a laugh like breaking glass and a gaze that held Julian's a beat too long. "She's a shark," he said, admirement thick in his voice, exactly what Thornfield needs to go to the next level. I saw the way her hand would linger on his shoulder as she pointed to something on his screen. I heard the private jokes that sparked between them in the foyer. When I hesitantly voiced a tremor of discomfort, Julian looked at me with genuine, wounded bewilderment. "Ilara? Really? Celeste? She's a child. And brilliant. Don't be so insecure. It's unbecoming." Insecure, unbecoming. The words were needles, expertly placed. I began to doubt the fabric of my own perception. Was I the problem? Had I, in my quiet domesticity, become small, boring? Had I let myself go? I looked in the mirror and saw the faint lines, the softness he now critiqued. I started wearing more makeup, bought clothes from the boutiques Celeste mentioned. I tried to become a woman who belonged in Julian's new glossy world. I was so busy trying to fix myself, I didn't see I wasn't the thing that was broken. The truth didn't burst in. It seeped under the door, cold and inevitable. It was a Thursday. A northeaster was threatening to bury Boston. I'd spent the day preparing for Eleanor's arrival. She was coming to ride out the storm with us, which meant 3 days of silent scrutiny. Julian was at the office, putting out fires before the freeze. I decided to bring him dinner, a gesture from the old days. The Thornfield offices were in a sleek tower downtown, all ambient lighting and silent elevators. I didn't announce myself. I had a keycard. The floor was dark, except for the light spilling from the corner conference room. I walked toward it, the tap of my heels muffled by the plush carpet. I heard their voices before I saw them. Julian's, low and intimate. Celeste's, laughing. I stopped in the shadow of a doorway. They were at the head of the long table, but they weren't discussing mergers. Celeste was perched on the table's edge. Julian stood between her knees, his hands on her waist. He was kissing her neck. "My wife," I heard him murmur, and my heart, foolish thing, gave a desperate leap. But he continued, "My wife is a relic, a sweet, simple thing from another life. She doesn't understand this world. She doesn't understand me anymore. Not like you do." Celeste sighed, a sound of pure contentment. "The prenup is solid. Eleanor made sure of it. Once the Ascension merger is signed next month, you'll be untouchable. We can transition her out. A nice, quiet settlement. She'll be grateful for anything." "She will," Julian said, his voice devoid of the warmth I'd once thought was meant only for me. "She's always been easily managed." I stood there, the insulated container of soup growing cold in my hand. There was no rage, no scream building in my throat. There was just a vast hollowing out, a silent collapse of my entire universe. The man I'd loved, built with, believed in, was a stranger conducting a cost-benefit analysis on my existence with his lover. I turned and walked away. The elevator descended, and with it the last of my denial. He asked for the divorce 2 days later, as the first snowflakes of the blizzard began to fall. He and Eleanor staged it in our living room like a boardroom negotiation. "Ilara, we've grown apart," Julian began, not meeting my eyes. He was reciting lines. "It's no one's fault, but Thornfield is entering a new phase. I need a partner who can be part of that journey, publicly, privately." Eleanor, sitting stiffly on the edge of the sofa, took over. "We've had the lawyers draw up the papers. The prenuptial agreement is exceptionally clear. You entered this marriage with student debt and a portfolio of paintings. You'll leave with the settlement that reflects your contribution." She slid a check across the glass coffee table. $50,000. A severance package for a decade of my life. My contribution? My voice was a thread. "I built this life with you, Julian. I supported you. I was your partner." "You were a wonderful homemaker," Julian said, and the condescension was a knife. "But let's be factual. The company, the assets, the intellectual property, that's my work, my vision. You were always more of a custodian." Eleanor's lips pursed. "The pre-car is leased to the company. Your jewelry was gifts, thus marital property. You may keep your personal clothing. We've booked a car for you. It will take you to a hotel for the night. You can make further arrangements from there." I looked at Julian, searching for a flicker of the man who found meaning in shadows. I saw only polished marble. "You're throwing me out," I said, the realization finally dawning. "In a blizzard?" "Don't be melodramatic, Ilara," Julian sighed, as if I were a tiresome child. "The car is a luxury sedan. You'll be perfectly comfortable." The cruelty was in its clinical efficiency. They weren't monsters raging. They were accountants closing a ledger. I was a line item to be zeroed out. I didn't touch the check. I walked to the closet, put on my old, worn wool coat, the one from before the Thornfield era, and left. I didn't take the car. I walked down the long, manicured driveway as the snow began to coat the world in a blank, silencing white. The gates clicked shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city with the cash I always kept in my wallet. For days, I was a ghost. I lay on the stiff bed, watching the snow pile up against the window. I didn't cry. I just dissolved. I replayed every moment, every choice, every sacrifice. Had I been a fool? Had my love been a weakness to be exploited? The memories were not kind. They were evidence, presented by a prosecution I hadn't known was building a case. The sleepless nights were a courtroom where I was both the accused and the judge, finding myself guilty of naivety, of trust, of love. The turning point came not with a bang, but with a quiet click. It was the sound of the motel room's cheap lock as I finally ventured out for food. The storm had passed, leaving a bruised, icy world. I bought a terrible coffee from a corner store and sat on a frozen bench watching people live their lives. A woman hurried past, scolding a laughing child for forgetting his gloves. An old man shuffled along, carefully navigating the ice. Life, mundane and resilient, continued, and I realized with a jolt, mine had to as well. I was Ilara Vance. Before I was Ilara Thorne, I was Ilara Vance, daughter of Alastair and Genevieve Vance. I had spent 10 years hiding from that name, from the weight and expectation of it, choosing to be loved for my simple self. Julian had never known. My father, the reclusive, titanic industrialist, had respected my wish for anonymity, watching from a distance with a heart I knew was broken. The cold air sharpened in my lungs. This wasn't just about a failed marriage. It was about a stolen self. Julian hadn't just taken my years. He'd taken my narrative, my credit, my very identity, and shrunk it down to custodian. The ember of a long, dormant pride began to glow, cutting through the numbness. It wasn't rage. It was a profound, clarifying sense of no. I took out my phone. My fingers, stiff from cold, dialed a number I hadn't called in a decade but knew by heart. It rang once. "Vance Holdings, Office of the Chairman." The voice was familiar, professional, unchanged. "It's Ilara." My voice was raspy from disuse. "Ilara? Good God, are you all right? Your father? Is he there?" "He's in a board meeting. I'll interrupt him immediately." "No," I said, looking at the gray sky. "Don't interrupt him. Just tell his daughter is ready to come home, and tell him I need to speak to Charles Bowen." Charles Bowen wasn't just a lawyer. He was a strategist, a man who specialized in the discreet dismantling of corrupt empires, the family's quiet cleaner. Miles's voice changed, becoming focused, sharp. Understood. Where are you? I'll send a car. No, I said again, the first of many new boundaries. I'll come to him. Give me the address. Charles Bowen worked from a townhouse that looks like a professor's study. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a mind like a vault. He listened to my story, not with pity, but with the intense focus of a cartographer. The prenup is airtight for a civilian, he said, steepling his fingers, but it has a fatal flaw. It defines separate property as assets held prior to the marriage. It never contemplated an alias. He opened a file. The initial seed funding for Thornfield Innovations, the $250,000 that bought the first servers and paid the first salaries, came from the Aethelred Trust, a blind trust. I blinked. Julian said it was an angel investor he met at a conference. The Aethelred Trust, Charles continued, is administered by Vance Holdings. Its sole beneficiary is you, Ilara Genevieve Vance. Your father established it when you left. He couldn't stop you, but he could make sure the man you loved had the means to care for you. Every major capital injection since has been structured through shells, all traceable back to your inheritance. The room tilted. Julian's self-made empire, his towering pride, was built on my money, the algorithm he claimed as his solitary genius. I remembered those late nights. He'd been stuck on a logic loop. I'd been sketching idly, a pattern of interlocking leaves. What if it's not a linear chain, but a dendritic network, like a tree? The problem branches, but the solution flows from a single root. He'd stared at my sketchpad, then at his code, and a light had gone on in his eyes. He called it a breakthrough. I called it a metaphor. He patented it. In my name, it would have been an interesting concept. In his, with my silent funding, it became a fortune. He doesn't own his company, I said, the truth settling with a terrible, calm weight. I do. Effectively, yes, Charles nodded, and by evicting you, the beneficiary in bad faith, you've triggered catastrophic default clauses across the loan agreements. We can freeze everything. The legal proceedings were not a battle, they were an autopsy. Julian, armed with his shark-like divorce lawyer, swaggered into the preliminary hearing, expecting surrender. He saw me, dressed in understated but impeccable clothes, and smirked, whispering something to Celeste, who was now openly by his side. He saw Charles Bowen amble in behind me, and the smirk faltered. The hearing was in a wood-paneled courtroom. Julian's lawyer argued for expediency, citing the prenup. The judge, an elderly woman with eyes like flint, turned to Charles. "Your response, Mr. Bowen." "We do not contest the validity of the prenuptial agreement, Your Honor. We seek to enforce the true ownership of the marital assets, which have been fraudulently obfuscated." He began to lay out the paper trail, the Aethelred Trust, the shell companies, the patent filing with its dubious provenance. Julian's face went from smug to confused to ashen. "This is ridiculous," he finally burst out. "Ilara she's a homemaker. She doesn't know anything about trusts or code." The judge fixed him with a stare. "She knows enough to have funded your entire operation, Mr. Thorne, and, according to this, she may have conceived its core product." She turned back to Charles. "Motion granted. All assets of Thornfield Innovations and Mr. Thorne's personal holdings are frozen pending a full forensic audit. The merger with Ascension Capital is hereby enjoined." The sound that left Julian was a guttural choke. Celeste's hand flew to her mouth. Eleanor, who had been sitting ramrod straight in the front row, made a small, desperate noise like a wounded bird. But the true karma was not in the court. It was in the world outside. The news, "Self-made CEO built fortune on secret wife's fortune," went viral. The security footage, leaked from our own home system, a system I, as the installer, still had admin rights to, showed my final walk into the blizzard. The court of public opinion rendered a swift and brutal verdict. The Ascension deal evaporated, investors fled, the board, facing liability, ousted Julian. He was left with nothing but the clothes he wore and a mountain of legal debt. Eleanor's social world evaporated. They were forced to sell everything, moving into a grim, small apartment. The life they had so carefully curated and so carelessly used me to build crumbled to dust. I didn't lift a finger to cause it. I simply stopped holding it up. I didn't take the house in Chestnut Hill. I sold it and used the proceeds to endow a foundation for women re-entering the workforce after personal sacrifice. I took control of Thornfield, not to run it, but to dismantle its toxic culture and restructure it ethically before selling it to a competitor who valued its true potential, the algorithm, which I now openly credited as a collaborative idea. I bought a light-filled loft near the water. My walls are now covered in art, vibrant, challenging, beautiful pieces that speak to me. I finished my degree. I sit on the board of the museum. My life is my own. I saw Julian one last time, about a year later. I was leaving a restaurant. He was waiting tables there. He was clearing a plate, his posture defeated, his once bright eyes dull. We locked eyes across the room. A storm of emotions passed over his face. Shame, hatred, a pathetic glimmer of hope. He took a hesitant step towards me. I didn't smile, I didn't frown. I simply gave him a small, neutral nod, the kind you'd give a vaguely familiar stranger, and turned away. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the sun warm on my face. That was the victory. Not his ruin, but my peace. Not his poverty, but my wholeness. They threw the wife out with nothing, believing she was nothing. They forgot that a name is just a word, but dignity, that's a language. And when you finally learn to speak it, the whole world has to listen. The snow melts, the ground thaws, and from the frozen, seemingly barren earth, something new and resilient always finds a way to grow. It doesn't grow to spite the winter. It grows because it is its nature to reach for the sun. And so did I.